David, you had a great point just before we went for break. I do want to finish this off before we go. A lot of people don't even realize that the municipalities actually do drive inflation in a number of different ways, restrictive
Mhm.
policy, regulations, but also development fees. Development fees are huge, something that really was non existent probably 10 or 15 years ago, now at a considerable cost to the house, not to mention HST and brand new homes. Any more thoughts on the municipal factors on housing?
Yeah, they really are the primary driver of housing inflation, both on the rental side and on the ownership side. We Canada has the fewest homes per capita in the G7, and if you just look at a map, that really shouldn't make much sense in terms of the amount of space that we have.
Yeah, all kinds of room. Yeah.
And so at every moment in especially in major cities, but also in the suburbs, you have mayors and city councilors block development because they don't like the shading of a building or they don't like the angle of the top 10 floors of a building. And all of those delays add costs and increase prices. And then, of course, the municipalities, for the most part, have decided that they want to pay for all future infrastructure on the backs of new home buyers. And there's this real hesitancy to increase property taxes for existing home buyers, which is always struck me as rather strange as a relatively younger Canadian, because what that does is that puts the entirety of the future burden on my generation to protect maybe older Canadians. Not that they've done anything wrong in this, from having their property taxes go up. And so we have this really uncomfortable generational divide here. And we see that in terms of the differences between millennials who own property and the generations who came before them. And so, yeah, the municipalities have a huge role to play in terms of sorting this crisis out.
Well, thanks for sharing that because I think people almost sometimes leave the municipalities out, either think it's a provincial or federal responsibility. Let's move on to sort of censorship. A couple bills this year, I think, affected the landscape. There'll be more bills like this on the way, probably in the coming years. C11 and C18. Maybe we could talk about C11 just first in terms of that whole issue of the government or the CRTC or whoever looking at and deciding what's Canadian enough and moving or putting content up or down as we look in our search engines. Just your thoughts on C11 and how it maybe affects the industry and how it affects
Yeah.
individuals.
Well, I mean, the whole concept seems rather outdated in a more globalized world. I think we can probably trust Canadians to figure out what content they want to consume and for Canadian content creators to compete for those viewers. And yes, I understand that some may say, well, that means that American content is going to drown out Canadian content. And well, if that's the case, then Canadian content has to do a better job of winning in the marketplace. That is extremely important. And I think the other factor here, when we talk about Canadian content and Canadian cultural preservation, we already spend $1 billion on the CBC. So I'm not sure why, if that is going to be the cultural hub, let's say online for Canada and what preserves Canadian culture or whatever it is that they're attempting to preserve, that should be enough. Um, that can be the home for whatever it is Ottawa's goal here is, and let consumers figure out the rest,
That's
because that ultimately means they're getting what they want, and it means you have that proper signal between consumer and provider, than trying to insert some opaque regulatory structure of is something Canadian enough.
Well, and I think you probably hit the nail on the head. There'd be a lot of Canadians who would argue the fact that we can compete because we do very well in certain instances. And like I said, as you said, the cream will rise to the top. We only have 40 seconds left, so let's start the topic of C18, and maybe we'll finish it off in the next segment. This whole notion of news being blocked, I find it troubling. Certainly, independent, small newspaper, local community online papers, because distribution is changing. It's tougher to get a paper actually delivered to your door. This is really going to have an effect on the small people. and the little independence as we move forward with C18. You know what we'll do? Let's go to a break right now, and we'll come back. I'd love to get your thoughts on what this does in terms of places like Facebook and Instagram blocking news for people
Mhm.
online. Okay, when we come back for break.